Humanity was the galaxy's golden retriever, relentlessly cheerful, endlessly forgiving, and dangerously misunderstood. For 3 decades, Earth's ambassadors smiled through every insult, every slight, and every unfair trade tariff. But when the Council ordered the orbital bombardment of a human colony, Ambassador Daniel Wright finally stopped smiling. And that's when the entire galaxy realized their fatal mistake. The Grand Chamber of the Pan-Galactic Coalition, situated in the heart of the Aegis Prime orbital station, was a marvel of xenological architecture. Its vaulted ceilings were forged from spun diamond, capturing the ambient light of the nearby binary stars and refracting it into a kaleidoscope of colors that washed over the delegates of 400 distinct species. The air was carefully filtered, carrying the scents of ozone, synthesized floral pheromones, and the faint, metallic tang of bureaucratic stagnation. In the center of this majestic, intimidating amphitheater sat the delegation from United Earth. They were Species 401, the newcomers, the upstarts, and, according to the vast majority of the galactic community, the absolute softest species to ever achieve faster-than-light travel. Ambassador Daniel Wright adjusted his spectacles, a purely cosmetic relic from Earth's 21st century that he wore simply because he felt it made him look more approachable, and smoothed the lapels of his charcoal gray suit. Daniel was a man in his late 50s, possessing a comfortably round midsection, a receding hairline, and a smile so warm and perpetually affixed to his face that it had become a galactic meme. Beside him sat his chief diplomatic aide, Abigail Hayes, a brilliant political strategist who spent most of her days silently grinding her teeth at the condescension the humans endured. "I brought the snickerdoodles," Daniel whispered, leaning over to Abigail, tapping a brushed steel biocontainment tin resting on his desk. "Baked them myself last night. Used real cinnamon from the Madagascar agridomes. You think High Counselor Vral will try one today?" Abigail suppressed a heavy sigh, her eyes scanning the data slate in front of her. "Sir, with all due respect, High Counselor Vral is a Draxian. His species considers chewing their food to be a sign of genetic weakness. They swallow prey whole. I don't think a cinnamon cookie is going to bridge the diplomatic divide." "You never know, Abby," Daniel said, his smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "A little sugar goes a long way. Diplomacy is just making friends, one small gesture at a time." To the rest of the coalition, humanity was a curiosity. They had burst onto the galactic stage mere decades ago, a fractured, divided species that had somehow managed to unify just in time to avoid destroying their own biosphere. When they met the coalition, they hadn't arrived in heavily armored dreadnoughts or projected their military might. Instead, they arrived with open arms, trade agreements, medical technologies, and an almost desperate desire to be liked. They were viewed as harmless, useful engineers, decent medics, and entirely lacking in the predatory instincts required to survive the harsh political landscape of the Orion Arm. The humans always yielded in trade disputes. They always apologized when an alien vessel drifted too close to their borders. They smiled, they bowed, and they baked. Across the chamber, High Counselor Vral of the Draxian hegemony loomed over his podium. The Draxians were apex predators from a high-gravity world, 7 feet of corded muscle, iridescent black scales, and a jaw filled with serrated, inward-curving teeth. They respected power, conquest, and the subjugation of the weak. To Vral, the humans were an offensive joke. They occupied prime real estate in the Artemis Vale sector, a territory the Draxians coveted for its rich deposits of zero-point hypercrystals. Vral slammed his heavy, clawed fist against the acoustic amplifier on his desk. The resounding boom echoed through the diamond-vaulted chamber, instantly silencing the murmurs of the delegates. The coalition recognizes the delegate from the Draxian hegemony, droned the mechanized voice of the central AI arbitrator. Vral stood, his reptilian eyes locking onto the human delegation. Members of the Council. For 3 cycles, we have debated the territorial rights of the Artemis Vale. The Draxian hegemony has presented historical claims, strategic necessities, and economic justifications. And yet, we are stalled by the incessant whining of Species 401. The humans. He spat the word like it was poison. Daniel Wright simply smiled, nodding politely as if Vral had just offered him a compliment. "We are a patient species," Vral continued, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone present. "But our patience has evaporated. The humans have established a civilian outpost, New Providence, in the heart of the Vale. They claim it is an agricultural and research colony. We claim it is an illegal occupation of Draxian space. We have demanded they evacuate. They have offered us trade concessions. Vral scoffed, a sound like grinding stones. Prey offering predators a share of the grass. Abigail tensed, her fingers flying across her data slate. Daniel, she whispered urgently, the Draxian fleet movements near the Veil. They've gone dark. The telemetry we were receiving from outposts in the sector just vanished. Daniel kept his eyes on Vral, his smile unwavering, though his voice dropped an octave, losing a fraction of its folksy warmth. Confirm with Admiral Miller. Quietly, I am already pinging Earth Command, Abigail replied, her heart rate spiking. Something is wrong. Therefore, Vral announced, spreading his massive, scaled arms, the Draxian hegemony is done negotiating. We are invoking the right of dominance. We will not wait for this bloated bureaucracy to shuffle papers. We are taking the Artemis Veil, and we are taking it today. A wave of shocked whispers washed through the council. The right of dominance was an antiquated, brutal law that had not been invoked in a century. It essentially legalized an unprovoked military strike against a weaker species. If the defending species could not hold their territory, they lost all legal claim to it. It was a thinly veiled excuse for slaughter. Daniel stood up, straightening his tie. He tapped his microphone. Excuse me, High Counselor Vral, if I may? Vral looked down at Daniel with undisguised contempt. Speak, human. Beg, if you must. It will entertain me. No begging today, I'm afraid, Daniel said, his voice cheerful, echoing through the chamber. I understand there's a disagreement regarding the Artemis Veil, but invoking archaic martial laws seems a bit extreme, wouldn't you agree? We have families on New Providence. Children, schools. We're currently building a zero-G botanical garden there. I have the blueprints here, if you'd like to see them. Perhaps we can come to a shared use agreement? United Earth is more than willing to grant the Draxian hegemony exclusive mining rights in the outer asteroid belt in exchange for leaving the colony in peace. He offered his brightest, most accommodating smile. We just want to be good neighbors, Vral. Come on over to our desk, have a snickerdoodle, and let's sign a lease agreement. Laughter rippled through the Draxian delegation. Even some of the neutral species chuckled at the humans' pathetic display of subservience. Vral leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. You misunderstand, Ambassador Wright. This is not a negotiation. I am not asking for the outer belt. I am claiming the entire sector. And to ensure you understand the severity of your position, I am here to inform you that the eviction has already begun. Daniel's smile remained, but his posture went rigidly still. What do you mean already begun? Daniel asked. The pleasant lilt in his voice had thinned, though the corners of his mouth remained stubbornly upturned. Vral pressed a sequence on his console. In the center of the massive chamber, the three-dimensional holographic projector hummed to life. A massive, high-definition sphere of light materialized, displaying the cold, starry expanse of the Artemis Veil. In the center of the projection hung a human civilian convoy. The flagship was the Pilgrim's Rest, a massive, slow-moving colony ship carrying over 8,000 settlers, hydro-agricultural equipment, and terraforming engines. It was a lumbering behemoth of peace, completely unarmed, save for basic micrometeoroid deflector shields. Surrounding it were 3 Draxian dreadnoughts. They were terrifying constructs of black metal and glowing red plasma engines, bristling with kinetic railguns and thermal lances. This footage is live, Vral declared proudly, pacing behind his podium, transmitted directly from the flagship of Commander Kale. As you can see, the human vessels have been intercepted. Abigail gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They're in deep space. They were en route to New Providence to deliver winter supplies. They have no military escort. Correct, little human, Vral sneered. We intercepted them outside your pathetic sensor range. 20 minutes ago, Commander Kale ordered the human vessels to surrender and prepare to be boarded and relocated to Draxian labor camps. They refused. They cited some irrelevant human document, the Geneva Conventions, I believe. They claimed non-combatant immunity. Vral laughed, a harsh barking sound. So, to demonstrate our resolve, we disabled their main thrusters. On the hologram, the massive engines of the Pilgrim's Rest erupted in silent, localized explosions, venting atmosphere and burning plasma into the void. Murmurs of unease swept through the coalition. While many species viewed humans as weak, Attacking an unarmed colony ship in deep space was generally considered bad form, even by the lax standards of the galactic rim. Yet, no one stood to intervene. The Draxians were too powerful, their military too vast. No one was going to risk their own fleets to save a few thousand humans. But we did not stop there, Vral continued, his eyes gleaming with sadistic pleasure. Disabling a ship only stops its momentum. To truly break the will of prey, you must suffocate their hope. Commander Kale fired precision kinetic lances into their primary life support arrays. They are currently losing oxygen at a rate of 4% per minute. Their backup generators have been destroyed. The council chamber fell deathly silent. On the projection, the visual feed zoomed in on the Pilgrim's Rest. Through the thick, reinforced glass of the observation decks, the council could see tiny figures, human civilians, engineers, mothers, fathers, children, panicking. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in a grim, pulsing red. They were clutching oxygen masks, huddling together, trapped in a freezing metal coffin drifting in the dark. Abigail Hayes was shaking violently, tears spilling over her cheeks as she desperately typed on her console, trying to hail Earth Command, trying to find any ship within jump range. "Sir," she choked out, "we have nothing in the sector. The closest fleet is the 4th Vanguard, and they are 3 days away at maximum warp. They're going to die. 8,000 people." Vral looked down at Daniel Wright, expecting to see the human break. He expected tears. He expected the man to fall to his knees, to beg the council for intervention, to sign away the Artemis Veil without another word in exchange for the lives of his people. Instead, Daniel Wright was still standing. He was perfectly still. "Ambassador Vral," Daniel said. His voice was soft. It didn't boom through the acoustic amplifiers, but it carried perfectly through the sudden, suffocating silence of the room. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am going to give you exactly one opportunity to contact Commander KL. You will order him to deploy emergency life support umbilical tethers to the Pilgrim's Rest. You will evacuate those civilians onto your dreadnoughts, treat them with dignity, and return them to Earth space. Do you understand?" Vral blinked, visibly confused by the human's tone. It lacked the hysteria of prey. "You are making demands? Your people are suffocating in the dark, human. You have nothing to bargain with. Sign the treaty surrendering the Artemis Veil, pledge humanity as a client race to the Draxian hegemony, and I might order KL to save the survivors." Daniel didn't look at the treaty on his desk. He didn't look at the horrifying hologram of his dying people. He looked only at Vral. And slowly, deliberately, the smile that had defined humanity for 30 years began to slip. It didn't happen all at once. The crinkles around his eyes smoothed out. The upward curve of his lips leveled into a flat, hard line. The warmth, the folksy charm, the grandfatherly demeanor, it all vanished, draining from his face like water pulling back before a tsunami. When Daniel Wright looked at Vral now, his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a creature that looked at a living being and saw only meat. The change was so drastic, so fundamentally unnatural, that Abigail actually flinched away from him. "Vral," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute monotone. "I am not bargaining. I am not negotiating. I am extending a courtesy. Power up their life support. Now." "I am a predator of the high crags," Vral roared, slamming his fist down again, insulted by the human's defiance. "I do not take orders from weak, smiling apes. Watch your people die, Ambassador." Daniel took a slow, deep breath. He reached up and took off his spectacles, folding them neatly and placing them into the breast pocket of his suit. "Okay," Daniel whispered. The moment Daniel Wright stopped smiling, the atmospheric processors in the Grand Chamber seemed to falter. The air grew perceptibly colder. In the third tier of the amphitheater, Councillor Zen of the Vori suddenly dropped his data slate. The heavy glass shattered against the crystalline floor, the sound ringing out like a gunshot. The Vori were an ancient, scholarly species. They were the archivists of the galaxy, responsible for cataloging the deep histories, psychological profiles, and evolutionary paths of every species that joined the coalition. Because of their strict vows of neutrality and secrecy, they were the only ones who had been granted unredacted access to Earth's pre-spaceflight historical archives. Zen was trembling. His four spindly arms gripped the railing of his podium, his massive compound eyes locked onto the unsmiling face of Daniel Wright. "Counselor Zen?" asked the ambassador from the Lyran Concordat, standing next to him. "Are you unwell?" "Guards," Zen wheezed, his voice box clicking wildly in terror. "Security! Lock the doors! Seal the chamber! Oh, by the ancestors!" They stopped smiling. "Who?" the Lyran asked, bewildered. "The humans? They are simply grieving. It is a tragedy." "You don't understand!" Zen shrieked, his composure entirely shattering as he pointed a trembling finger at the human delegation. "You arrogant fools! You haven't read their files! You think they smile because they are friendly?" The entire chamber turned to look at the usually stoic archivist, who was now having a full-blown panic attack. "They are a Death World species," Zen screamed, his voice echoing off the diamond walls. "They didn't evolve through cooperation. They evolved through apex predation. They exterminated every other hominid on their planet. They split the atom just to vaporize their own cities. Their entire recorded history is a catalog of industrial slaughter, genocides, and world-burning wars." Vral looked up, a sneer of disbelief crossing his reptilian face. "Lies. They are farmers. They bake sweets. They cower behind rules and treaties." "The treaties aren't for them!" Zen cried out, tears of absolute horror leaking from his compound eyes. "The Geneva Conventions, the rules of engagement, the laws of war, they didn't create those to protect themselves from the galaxy. They created them to protect the galaxy from them. They smile to suppress the monster. The smile is a leash, and you just force them to take it off." A sudden, terrifying silence descended upon the room. The delegates looked from the hysterical archivist to the human ambassador. Daniel Wright was no longer the man who brought snickerdoodles. He stood with a posture that was perfectly straight, radiating a dark, suffocating gravity. He tapped his comms earpiece. "Command, this is Wright," Daniel said. His voice was no longer that of a diplomat. It was cold, clipped, and echoed with the steel of a military commander. A voice crackled back over the chamber's open audio channel, bypassing the Coalition's encrypted firewalls with terrifying ease. It was Admiral Jonathan Miller, commander of the United Earth Stellar Navy. "We are tracking the Pilgrim's Rest, Ambassador," Miller's voice rasped. "We see the telemetry. Civilians are dying." "I know, John," Daniel replied, his eyes locked dead onto Vral. "The diplomatic avenues have been exhausted. The Draxian hegemony has claimed responsibility for an unprovoked strike on non-combatants. They have refused our offer of de-escalation." "Understood, Tom," Miller said. The audio feed picked up the sound of heavy blast doors sealing in the background. "Orders?" Daniel didn't blink. He didn't waver. "Admiral, execute Protocol Carthage." On the other end of the line, there was a pause. A heavy, weighted silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. When Admiral Miller finally spoke, his voice carried the grim weight of an executioner. "God forgive us," Miller whispered. "Protocol Carthage is authorized. The restraints are off. Weapons free." High Counselor Vral barked a laugh, trying to mask the sudden, creeping dread crawling up his spine. "Protocol Carthage? What is this theater? Your Vanguard fleet is 3 days away. By the time your pathetic ships arrive, your colonists will be frozen corpses, and my dreadnoughts will be waiting to turn your fleet into scrap." Daniel slowly walked around his desk. He stepped out into the open floor of the chamber, ignoring the alien guards who instinctively raised their shock pikes. He walked until he was standing directly beneath the massive, holographic projection of the dying human ship, staring up at the 3 Draxian dreadnoughts. "You evaluated our military capabilities based on what we showed you," Daniel said, his voice quiet, yet commanding absolute attention. "You saw our patrol ships, our border guards. You saw our treaties and our smiles. You thought we were weak because we didn't flex our muscles over every petty border dispute." Daniel turned his lifeless eyes to Vral. "You clearly don't understand the concept of mutually assured destruction. Or the Fermi paradox. We didn't survive our infancy by being nice, Vral. We survived because we were the most ruthless, unrelenting killers our rock ever produced. When we reached the stars and found out we weren't alone, we were terrified, not of you, of ourselves." We knew that if we let our old habits take over, we would burn this galaxy to ash. He pointed up at the hologram. You think the 4th Vanguard is our military? The Vanguard is a glorified Coast Guard. It's the PR fleet we let you see so you wouldn't feel threatened. Suddenly, the holographic projection flickered. Deep space sensors around the Artemis Veil began to scream. Warning klaxons erupted throughout the Aegis Prime station, flashing strobes of red light through the diamond-vaulted chamber. "Central AI! Report!" demanded the Coalition president, a towering avian species flapping its wings in distress. Massive spatial ruptures detected in Sector 4G, Erips. The AI droned, its synthetic voice devoid of the panic gripping the room. Multiple slip space anomalies opening. Designation: unknown. On the hologram, the space behind the 3 Draxian dreadnoughts began to distort. It didn't look like standard, faster-than-light jump signatures. It looked like the fabric of reality was being violently torn apart. From the blackness of the rifts, ships began to emerge. They weren't the sleek, white, diplomatic vessels humanity normally flew. They were jagged, ugly, brutalist monstrosities built of radar-absorbent black armor. They had no running lights, no transponders, no life support windows. They were flying weapons, built around spinal-mounted singularity cannons that defied the known laws of coalition physics. 1, 10, 50, 100. Within seconds, an armada of over 300 human stealth dreadnoughts surrounded the 3 Draxian ships. They had been there the whole time, cloaked in the dark space between stars, waiting for the order to drop the veil. "What? What is that?" Vral stammered, his scales paling as the hologram displayed the true might of the human war machine. "How did you hide a fleet of that size?" "They are the shadow of Saul," Daniel said coldly, "and they aren't here to negotiate." On the hologram, the human armada didn't issue a warning. They didn't hail the Draxians. They didn't demand surrender. 100 singularity cannons fired simultaneously. There were no bright flashes of plasma or cinematic explosions. Space simply folded inward around the 3 Draxian dreadnoughts. The massive, shielded alien warships were instantly crushed into spheres of hyperdense matter the size of marbles, folding in on themselves with a terrifying, absolute silence. The 3 ships, and the 30,000 Draxian soldiers aboard them, simply ceased to exist. The human fleet seamlessly moved into formation around the Pilgrim's Rest, immediately deploying massive, armored umbilical tethers to restore life support to the freezing colonists. In the council chamber, pandemonium erupted. Delegates were screaming, hiding behind their desks. Vral collapsed back into his chair, his jaw hanging open, his arrogance completely annihilated in the span of 30 seconds. Daniel Wright didn't move. He stood in the center of the chaos, a pillar of stone. "President Holden sends his regards." "Vral," Daniel said, his voice cutting through the screaming alien dignitaries. "And he asked me to deliver a message to the rest of the coalition." Daniel looked around the room, making eye contact with every alien leader who had spent the last 30 years mocking humanity. "We tried to be the golden retrievers," Daniel said softly. "We really did. But you just woke the wolves, and we are very, very hungry." The silence in the grand chamber of the Pan-Galactic Coalition was no longer just the absence of noise. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of terror that pressed against the chest cavities of 400 alien delegates. The holographic projection above them continued to cycle through the live feed of the Artemis Veil. Where 3 invincible Draxian dreadnoughts had hung moments before, there was only empty space, dusted with the microscopic debris of crushed atoms. High Counselor Vral of the Draxian hegemony stood frozen behind his podium. His iridescent black scales, usually slick with the natural oils of a healthy predator, had turned a dull, ashen gray. His serrated jaws parted, but the booming, terrifying rumble that usually commanded the room was gone. Only a faint, dry hiss escaped his throat. "You," Vral stammered, his yellow eyes wide, darting from the hologram to the unnervingly still figure of Ambassador Daniel Wright. "This is a trick, a sensor ghost. You do not possess singularity weaponry. No species in the Coalition possesses singularity weaponry." "We didn't develop it to share it, Vral," Daniel said, his voice entirely devoid of the folksy warmth he had weaponized for 30 years. He kept his hands clasped neatly behind his back. "Do you know what the hardest part of the last 3 decades has been for us? It wasn't the unfair tariffs. It wasn't the diplomatic snubs. It was sitting in this room, listening to empires that still use basic plasma fusion drives lecture us on technological superiority. Daniel took a slow, measured step toward the center of the floor. The alien honor guards flanking the aisles instinctively recoiled, their shock pikes lowering not in aggression, but in pure, unadulterated fear. When we first achieved faster-than-light travel, Daniel continued, his voice echoing off the diamond-vaulted ceiling, we found a galaxy filled with empires that operated on the principles of conquest. You, the Lyrans, the Krell, you all expand by taking, by consuming. On Earth, we call that a dark forest protocol. We knew that if we stepped out into the light and showed you our teeth, you would unify out of fear and try to crush us. Abigail Hayes, sitting at the human delegation desk, felt her hands trembling as she typed. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline. For years, she had bitten her tongue, playing the role of the subservient secretary to a supposedly weak species. Now, she was inputting the command codes that would unseal humanity's true geopolitical standing. So, Daniel said, we smiled. We baked cookies. We offered medical aid. We let you laugh at our slow, clumsy diplomatic ships. And while you were laughing, our DARPA Black Site engineers and the Lockheed Northrop orbital coalitions were busy. We spent 3 trillion terrestrial credits a year, turning our solar system into a fortress and our stealth fleets into ghosts. Vral's predatory instincts finally broke through his shock, manifesting as desperate, cornered rage. He slammed both fists onto his console. You are one fleet, human! A sneak attack! The Draxian hegemony spans 40 star systems. We have 10,000 warships. I will order the total mobilization of the Armada. We will glass your agricultural worlds. We will boil the oceans of Earth until your species is nothing but an ash layer in the geological strata. Counselor Zen of the Vori, still trembling in the 3rd tier, let out a pathetic whimper. Vral, you fool, stop talking. Do you not understand what they are? Daniel didn't look at Zen. He kept his dead eyes locked on the Draxian High Counselor. 10,000 ships. Yes, we know, Vral. We know exactly how many ships you have. We know where they are docked. We know their patrol routes. Daniel gestured lazily to Abigail. Abby, show them the trade routes. Yes, sir, Abigail replied, her voice steady and ringing with newfound authority. She executed the command. The central hologram shifted. The view of the Artemis Veil shrank, replaced by a massive, glittering map of the Draxian hegemony's territorial space. Hundreds of stars, connected by glowing red lines indicating Draxian military slipspace lanes. For 30 years, Daniel explained, pacing slowly beneath the glowing map, humanity has been the galaxy's premier merchants. We traded grain. We traded water. We shipped medical supplies to your outer colonies when your own government deemed them too costly to supply. You laughed at us for being delivery boys. Suddenly, the red lines on the map began to flash. Small green pips started appearing along every single trade route humanity had ever established within Draxian space. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. Our cargo haulers, Daniel whispered, his voice slicing through the chamber like a scalpel, are very large, and space is very empty. Every time a human vessel dropped out of warp to deliver grain to your worlds, they left something behind. A passive sensor buoy, a hyperspace tether, a stealth-targeting drone. For 30 years, Vral, we haven't been trading. We've been painting the target. Vral's massive chest heaved as he stared at the map. The green pips humanity's hidden assets were clustered around every major Draxian military shipyard, every fuel depot, every orbital defense platform. Admiral Miller, Daniel said into his comms earpiece, update. The grim, gravelly voice of the human fleet commander filled the chamber once more. Protocol Carthage is at Phase 2, Ambassador. The Shadow of Saul was just the vanguard. The home fleet has locked coordinates onto Draxian military infrastructure. We have stealth ablative torpedoes, armed with zero-point warheads sitting entirely undetected in the blind spots of their orbital grids. We are holding at the red line, awaiting your signal. A collective gasp echoed through the alien dignitaries. Zero-point warheads. Weapons of mass destruction, so theoretically unstable that the coalition had outlawed even the mathematical research required to build them. Humanity hadn't just built them. They had quietly smuggled them into the heart of a hostile empire disguised as civilian freight. Vral staggered backward, his knees buckling slightly. The illusion of Draxian supremacy was shattering around him like cheap glass. You, you would murder billions. You claim to be peaceful, yet you hold my worlds hostage with doomsday weapons. We don't want to murder anyone, Daniel corrected, stopping his pacing. He stared up at Vral, his expression unreadable. We want to build a botanical garden on New Providence. We want to trade. We want to be left alone to explore the stars. But understand this, High Counselor. The treaties, the rules of engagement, the Geneva Conventions, these aren't laws we impose on you. They are chains we placed upon ourselves because we know the depths of our own savagery. Daniel pointed a finger at the massive Draxian. You decided to ignore the rules today. You fired on our civilians. You tried to take off our leash. So, here we are. The chamber was dead. Even the central AI had suspended its routine processing hum, as if the machine itself understood that the fate of billions rested on the next few seconds. I am going to offer you a choice, Vral, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft register. The same choice I offered you 20 minutes ago. Abigail tapped her console, and a digital document materialized on the screen in front of Vral's podium. It was the exact same treaty Daniel had proposed at the beginning of the session. United Earth will grant the Draxian hegemony exclusive mining rights in the outer asteroid belt of the Artemis Veil, Daniel recited verbatim. In exchange, the hegemony formally recognizes human sovereignty over the inner system, including the colony of New Providence. Furthermore, the hegemony will issue a formal apology for the unauthorized military exercise that briefly interrupted the Pilgrims' rest, and will pay reparations for the damaged thrusters. Vral stared at the document. His mind, wired for absolute dominance or total submission, couldn't process the scenario. You have a gun to the head of my homeworld. You have annihilated 3 of my greatest warships. You could demand my surrender. You could claim the entire hegemony as a client state. Why are you offering me a mining lease? Because we are humans, Daniel said simply, and we like to be good neighbors. The sheer, terrifying absurdity of the statement hung in the air. Zen of the Vori wept silently into his 4 hands, realizing the brilliant, horrifying psychology of the human strategy. They weren't conquering the Draxians. Conquest required occupation, logistics, and ongoing war. By offering the exact same gentle terms from a position of absolute, godlike superiority, humanity was doing something far worse to the Draxians. They were demonstrating absolute restraint. To a predator, violence is natural. But holding the power to annihilate an enemy and choosing to hand them a lease agreement instead, that was the mark of a monster so far beyond the apex that it didn't even view its rival as prey. It viewed them as an annoyance. Sign it, Daniel commanded softly, or I will tell Admiral Miller to proceed to Phase 3, and tomorrow the Draxian hegemony will be nothing but a cautionary tale in Counselor Zen's archives. Vral looked around the room. He looked for support from the Lyrans, from the Krell, from the avian president of the coalition. Every single delegate averted their eyes. The galactic hierarchy had just been violently, permanently inverted, and no one was willing to look the new masters in the eye. With a trembling, heavily clawed hand, Vral reached out. He pressed his biometric signature onto the digital treaty. The terminal chimed a cheerful, synthesized tone, signaling the legal binding of the agreement. Transaction complete, the central AI announced, the normalcy of its voice jarring against the tension in the room. Vral slumped over his podium, his massive frame seeming to deflate. The pride of the hegemony was broken. It is done. Call off your weapons. Daniel stared at Vral for a long, agonizing moment. Then, he reached into his breast pocket. Slowly, Daniel pulled out his wire-rimmed spectacles and slid them onto his face. The rigid, military posture melted away, replaced by the comfortable slouch of a middle-aged bureaucrat. The hard lines of his face softened, his eyes crinkled at the corners, and the famous, warm, grandfatherly smile returned to his lips. But to the 400 alien delegates watching him, that smile was no longer a sign of weakness. It was the most terrifying thing they had ever seen. It was the closed door of a cage holding a starving beast. "Thank you, High Counselor," Daniel said, his voice bursting with folksy, cheerful energy once more. "I knew we could come to a reasonable compromise. Oh, almost forgot. Daniel reached down to his desk, picked up the brushed steel biocontainment tin, and popped the lid. The sweet scent of Madagascar cinnamon wafted through the sterile, ozone-scented air of the chamber. He walked up the steps to the Draxian podium, past the terrified guards, and set a single, perfectly baked snickerdoodle on Vral's desk. "Family recipe," Daniel whispered, his smile radiant. "Enjoy it." Daniel turned his back on the apex predator, walked down the steps, and rejoined Abigail. He picked up his briefcase. "Come along, Abby. Let's head back to the embassy. I think we've made enough friends for one day." "Yes, sir," Abigail said, a small, knowing smile playing on her own lips as she gathered her data slates. As the two humans walked out of the grand chamber, the massive spun diamond doors hissing shut behind them, the silence remained. The delegates of the Pan-Galactic Coalition stared at the empty human desk. Then up at the hologram still showing the invisible, terrifying might of the human armada hovering in the dark. Humanity was still the golden retriever of the galaxy, but the Coalition finally understood the truth. Even a golden retriever is descended from wolves, and the wolves were always waiting in the dark. What an absolutely chilling display of human strategy and hidden power. If you loved seeing humanity turn the tables and prove that a smile is the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy, smash that like button and subscribe for more epic HFY sci-fi stories. Let me know in the comments, what other harmless human traits do you think would terrify an alien empire? Don't forget to share this video to warn the galaxy. Stay safe and see you in the stars.
Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, the humans stopped smiling, and every alien in the council room instantly began to panic. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the tension and anticipation built into the story. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't a battle or a speech. It's a simple change in expression that tells everyone something important is about to happen. That shift created a sense of respect, mystery, and curiosity that carried the story forward. One lesson I took away is that people often reveal their true strength through quiet confidence rather than loud words. In everyday life, how we carry ourselves can speak just as clearly as anything we say. Do you think the aliens were reacting to the humans' reputation, or to something deeper they understood about human nature? And what was the most memorable moment for you? Thanks for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, and maybe like or subscribe for more stories like this.